Thank you. Good morning. One more time. Doesn't that feel better? Makes me feel better. Here are the ground rules for today. Let's do it the other way. Brian flipped the page on me. Thank you, Brian. And thank you to the Chamber for holding today's debate. For today's debate, we have incumbent Congresswoman Elaine Luria and her challenger, State Senator Jen Kiggans. Their full bios are in your program, so in the interest of time, I will say a few brief words of introduction for these candidates, which was prepared by the Chamber. Congresswoman Elaine Luria represents Virginia's 2nd Congressional District. Prior to her election in 2018, Representative Luria served 2 decades in the Navy, retiring at the rank of commander. Welcome, Congresswoman Elaine Luria. Jen Kiggans is a state senator that represents Virginia's 7th District. State Senator Kiggans served in the Navy for 10 years. Welcome, State Senator Jen Kiggans. Now, here are the ground rules for today. The candidate's speaking order was determined by a coin toss done before the start of the event. Senator Kiggans won the toss and will speak first. Candidates will have 2 minutes for their opening statement. A timer is in front of the stage. The debate will follow a traditional question and answer format with a 2-minute timed response. I will address a question to a candidate, and the candidate has 2 minutes to respond. I will enforce strict time limits. Each candidate will be allowed a 30-second rebuttal for each question. I have the authority to interrupt proceedings and enforce the ground rules and format, but I do not interrupt their answers. The candidates will not interrupt one another during the debate. A closing statement of 2 minutes will be allowed to sum up positions, tie up loose ends, and answer any issues that come up during the forum. The candidates will deliver closing statements in reverse order of opening statements. Let's begin with State Senator Jen Kiggans, who won the coin toss. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Jen Kiggans, and I'm running for Congress to restore American strength. In 2019, I got tired of yelling at my television, the nightly news, so I got off my couch to run for the Virginia State Senate. I felt underrepresented as a conservative female veteran, and I knew that our country deserved better leadership than the negative rhetoric and division that I saw on TV. It has been a great honor to have a seat at the table in the historic chamber of the State Senate, but I've also had a front row seat to what I considered to be the danger and insanity of one-party political rule and a very dangerous way to govern. The majority of Virginians agreed with me, and we saw great victories last November with the election of a new governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and now Republican House of Delegates. I see the same danger and insanity now happening in the halls of Congress, with a very liberal progressive Democratic Party leading our country in a direction that does not align with my values, nor the values of so many other Americans. I see a country that has become weaker under the policies of Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and Elaine Luria, who votes with their failed policies 99% of the time. Our economy is in shambles with 40-year high record-breaking inflation in a country in a recession. Our southern border is wide open and contributes to human trafficking and tragic numbers of unnecessary deaths caused by fentanyl. Our communities are riddled with high crime and low law enforcement recruitment and retention. Our parents are fighting to be recognized as the primary educators of their children who know what's best for them, and they are ridiculed for demanding to have a voice in our schools. After a chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, our world is less safe and our military is weakened. Our current military budget does not meet the needs of the military, and our enlisted servicemen and women continue to struggle and cannot afford gas and groceries on their fixed income budgets. I'm running to restore American strength in our economy, at our border, in our communities, including our children's education and reducing crime, and on the world stage.
Thank you.
I look forward to sharing my vision for our Commonwealth and our country with you today.
Thank you. Congresswoman Luria.
Good morning. It's great to be back here. Thank you again to the Chamber, as always, for hosting this event and the opportunity to talk about the issues. I'm Elaine Luria. I've been representing you in the U.S. House of Representatives for the last 4 years. I'll tell you, I was never on the couch, so I didn't have to get up. I served for 20 years in the United States Navy, was a commander of a combat unit of 400 sailors here at Little Creek, and once I finished my service and after being a small business owner here in Norfolk and Virginia Beach, I decided that there were other ways to continue to serve our community. And in Congress, I've been serving as the vice chair of the Armed Services Committee, the chair of the Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs Subcommittee. We've passed the largest increase in access to veterans care, which was my legislation under this administration. And as far as defense goes, over the course of the last 2 years alone, I have personally been responsible for adding $62 billion to the defense budget to increase the strength of America, to keep us the strongest military in the world, and to stand up to China and the threats that we have in the world today, which is a very dangerous place with regards to China's increased aggression against Taiwan, with regards to Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. And I will continue to fight that fight to grow our Navy. And we know here in Hampton Roads, these are not only national defense issues, these are the lifeblood of our community, where we build all of the carriers, half the submarines. When the nation called and we needed to send additional response and enforcements to support NATO, we sent 14,000 of our sailors on the Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, the Kearsarge Amphibious Ready Group. We build the ships, we man the ships, we deploy the ships. The United States of America is the strongest military in the world, and we will continue to support that as we've done over the last 2 years with the largest defense budgets in history. And I look forward to talking about those issues more today and continuing to represent you in my role in Congress.
Thank you, Congresswoman. First question goes to State Senator Jen Kiggans. Every poll says that the state of the American economy is the #1 issue on voters' minds. A recent ABC News Washington Post poll said that 84% of likely voters responded that the economy is the issue that is most important to them this year. On a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the best and 1 being the worst, how do you rate the health of the American economy, and what public policies do you think need to be addressed to improve your rating? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So I'm running for Congress to restore strength in our economy. And of all the doors I knock on, the voters I talk to, the moms in carpools, the people at civic leagues, this is the issue that they complain about. They talk to me about the gas prices that are too much. Even this past week, a 20 to 30% rise in gas prices. They talk to me about their grocery prices. They talk to me about their savings account. People don't have as much as they used to in their savings account. These are people on fixed incomes in our district. People like our enlisted servicemen and women, people like our senior citizens. So this, by far and away, is the #1 issue. We've got inflation at a 40-year high right now. It went from 9.1% to 8.5, 8.3. It was 1.4% when Joe Biden took office. This November will be a referendum on what I consider to be failed economic policies from the Joe Biden administration. In the 2nd District, those policies go by the name of Elaine Luria, who votes for them 99% of the time. For example, Elaine Luria, has voted most recently for the Inflation Reduction Act that she herself, said that was name only. It's really a huge environmental bill. But we look at what that's doing. It's raising taxes. It's not helping our inflation rate for people who are struggling. We've got 1 out of 6 Americans who currently can't pay their utility bills. These are the people that are hurting in our district. So we've got to do better for them. And Republicans have a commitment to America that we are going to do things to reduce our gas prices, things like finding domestic energy sources, being domestic energy producers again. We've got to find ways to lower the inflation rate. But I cannot wait to run for Congress this year to restore strength in our economy. And we've got to do better than what we've currently doing, because there's not a single person in this room who can tell me that they are paying less. Even this morning, my husband says, we had a box of croissants, and he says, those croissants used to be $2.99. Why did you pay $4.99 for them this week? And that's what's happened over the past 2 years of the Joe Biden administration. Thank you.
2 minutes. Congresswoman Luria.
So when I go around the district, I talk to people in the community. I understand that consumer prices are up when we go to the gas pump, when we go to the grocery store. Things have gotten more expensive. That's a fact. And I listen to my opponent talk about how this is because of failed policies of this administration. Gas prices are high. Gas prices are high because Vladimir Putin made them high. I voted for the Inflation Reduction Act because it's the largest investment in an all-of-above energy plan and in the environment that our country's ever seen. We don't need Vladimir Putin to be deciding the price of a gallon of gas in the United States. We need to be energy independent. In order to do that, we have to bring in all of the things such as advanced nuclear, for which I've been a huge advocate. I've supported that with Senator Murkowski, the Nuclear Energy Leadership Act, which passed the House last year, advanced reactors, advanced high-assay LEU nuclear fuel, offshore wind. The hugest economic opportunity and driver for Hampton Roads to diversify our economy in our lifetimes. But I think my opponent is clearly saying that she opposed the legislation that would have supported that and provided us significant resources in this region to grow that industry and to get to the goal of 30 gigawatts by 2030. And the bipartisan infrastructure package, another piece of legislation which makes the investment that we've been trying to make in infrastructure for decades. I see the Port of Virginia here is one of the sponsors of this event. Ask the Port of Virginia about what they think about the bipartisan infrastructure package. This provides the resources that we need to expand our port. We're the third largest port on the East Coast. These prices, you see supply chain backups, the ships off of Long Beach. But here we've increased to 3 million TEUs, container units, over 50% increase over the time of COVID. We are investing in things that will grow our economy, that will reduce gas prices. And from what I can see, my opponent is actually not providing any solutions for these things that she's complaining about.
Thank you, Congresswoman. 30-second rebuttal. Senator Kiggans.
Again, the Inflation Reduction Act, which my opponent voted for, she said herself it's in name only. It's really a huge environmental bill, which is going to raise your energy costs and increase your government mandates. Oh, by the way, spends $80 billion to hire 87,000 new IRS agents, which are going to come after the low and middle income earners who are hurting the most right now. You talk about the infrastructure bill. You know, that bill, only 6% of that bill went to actual roads and bridges and transportation improvements. So the rest is driving up inflation. And my opponent has supported these things 99% of the time with Nancy Pelosi.
Thank you. 30 seconds, Congresswoman Luria.
You know, I thought about doing a rebuttal, but I think the merits of this legislation stands on its own, and I can see that she has a sheet over there. She continues to read the same talking points, so I probably don't need to rebut them for an hour and a half, so I'll pass.
Okay. I don't think I heard a scale number. I'll throw it back again to Senator Kiggans. On a scale of 1 to 10, where do you rate the American economy on its health? 1 being the worst and 10 being the best.
1, if maybe a half. Definitely 1.
I choose to be more realistic. I would say it's probably, you know, about a 6. We have challenges. We came out of a once-in-a-lifetime economic challenge that we had through the COVID pandemic. We had to respond to that. We started that in the Trump administration on a bipartisan basis, unanimously in the House and the Senate. So the things she's claiming are all the Biden administration. We started those long before Biden came into office. We had a choice when COVID happened. We could either do nothing, have the longest, slowest, most painful recovery in history, and still be seeing 20% unemployment, or we could be where we are today, right back with 3.5% unemployment, 1 million jobs created last month, and wages rising, and our economy is growing. It's here and needs to get here, but we are making progress, and those people that you were talking to, their wages are up, and we have challenges that we need to work on with regards to the other issues for gas prices, for example.
Thank you. Since Congresswoman Luria brought up the pandemic, we'll go to a question to her. Congresswoman Luria, is the pandemic over? When it is decided that it declared over officially, what do we do about Medicaid eligibility? 2 minutes.
So I think that COVID is still a risk. It's still spreading. We need to continue to vaccinate, and we need to continue to get boosters. And as a healthcare professional, I'm sure my opponent would agree that vaccines are important, perhaps. But you know, we're here in this room. We're not wearing masks. We're more or less back to normal. But one of the things that we really need to do is make sure we're prepared for future pandemics and other health crises. And during the COVID pandemic, we recognize that access to healthcare, it's always a challenge. We fortunately, through the Affordable Care Act, which enabled Medicaid expansion, which the General Assembly did, 700,000 more Virginians have access to health care through Medicaid expansion, and we need to continue to make sure that those individuals who take advantage of that access to health care have that health care, have quality health care here in our region, and I see so many of the key players in health care in Hampton Roads are here and care about these issues. So I don't... I guess I will just finish by saying that it has been a value of mine that we ensure that we have the most affordable access to the most comprehensive and quality health care for everyone across our region. And perhaps I'll have an opportunity to talk about the expansion of veterans health care later on in the debate.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luria. Now, Senator Jen Kiggans. Is the pandemic over?
So we saw what happened in the COVID pandemic. We saw our businesses being closed. We saw our schools being shut, and then we saw our parents being shut out of our schools. We saw our kids being at home and the ramifications that had to their education. We're still dealing with some of the ramifications of what happened during COVID. Is COVID over? COVID's still out there. People are still testing positive for COVID. You know, if you can, yes, I'm a geriatric nurse practitioner. I give health care. I encourage people who are wanting to get vaccinated to get their vaccines. I always have. People are still getting COVID, but we found ways to live with it, and a large percentage of our population has been vaccinated. But what I worry about COVID, the lasting effects of COVID that we are seeing for our businesses, we are still seeing businesses that are struggling with getting people back to work. My opponent voted for the American Rescue Plan, which paid people extra to stay home last summer. You know, in Hampton Roads, travel and tourism is so important to the livelihood of so many of our people here. Yet we had federal legislation passed that paid people an extra $300 a week that my opponent voted for last summer. These are the ramifications that we're still dealing with. When we talk about workforce shortages, we can do better than that. You know, we talk about health care and people on Medicaid. And again, I'm a health care provider. I want people to have health care. It's what I do as a nurse practitioner. I took an oath to do that as well as my military oath. So I want people to have health care. I want people to have a stake in that game. You know, I believe in primary preventative care as a great way to save health care costs going forward. So I want people to take advantage of the health care that's available to them, especially mental health care. I see one of the ramifications after COVID that not just adults are struggling with, but children and our senior citizens as well, is that mental health care piece. So I want it to be available and accessible to everyone to make our Commonwealth a great place to live.
I'd like a rebuttal.
30-second rebuttal, Congresswoman Luria.
So when I go out and I visit many small businesses around the region, there's not a single small business owner who I talk to in our community who doesn't say thank you for the support that they got through the Payroll Protection Program, through EIDL loans, through the SBA. That is what kept people in their jobs, that allowed businesses to keep their doors open. That, the Restaurants Act, that funding. Yes, businesses are still struggling because there was a time, because of a public health emergency, we needed to shut those businesses down until we had a vaccine and a safe way for people to return to work. But the work that we have done has kept so many businesses in our community open.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Kiggans.
And businesses still continue to struggle. And again, this is a direct result of what I will always and still consider to be failed economic policies of the Joe Biden administration that my opponent supports 99% of the time. This is the time that we have to look out for our small businesses, all of our businesses, small and large, but the ones especially that have their homes here in Virginia, we've got to look, what can we do for them? This is not the time to raise taxes on them. This is not the time for extra government mandates. This is not the time to continue to have wasteful spending like we're seeing in the halls of Congress that the Joe Biden administration, along with Nancy Pelosi and Elaine Luria, have continued to vote for.
Thank you, Senator. The next question goes to Senator Kiggans. Here's the breakdown of the three leading industries in Hampton Roads. Number one, 45% defense spending. Two, 25%, the Port of Virginia. And three, tourism is at 15%. Defense spending is the number one economic driver in this region, and it's not close. Because of that, if Uncle Sam gets a fiscal sniffle, this region gets the flu. The question is, what is your top public policy that you will work on to ensure a thriving environment for this region's prosperity? 2 minutes.
Yes, the defense industry is by far and away the most important, has the most important economic impact in our Hampton Roads area, along with the port, in our tourism and travel. You know, what we've seen right now is a defense budget that is, that in my opinion, we could do so much better in. We see a military that is weakened. We know that it's affecting things like our ship repair, our shipbuilders, people who are defense contractors. These people need a budget that they can rely on so that they can employ a workforce that they can sustain for the entirety of the year. But we're not seeing that budget pan out. You know, I'm the daughter of a Green Beret who served in Vietnam. I am not only a military veteran as a helicopter pilot, but also the wife of an F-18 pilot and as a military spouse. I know of children who serve. I have a son who is a senior at the Naval Academy and a son who's at VMI on an NROTC scholarship, so my children will serve now. And what I see is a weakened military. I see a defense budget that does not meet the needs of the Navy, and then it impacts the defense industry here in our jobs, and our jobs that are part of that industry. As a person who has so much family invested in our military, I take it very personally. It's a very personal reason why I run for Congress. I run to restore American strength in our military. I'm running against an opponent who is sat as vice chair of the Armed Services Committee. She has had a seat at the table. She's been in the majority party that controls the defense budget, and she hasn't gotten it done. She hasn't met the needs of the Navy, and we are in a weakened place because of that. So I run this year to restore American strength, especially in our defense industry.
Thank you, Senator. Congresswoman Luria, you have 2 minutes.
Well, to answer the question first, offshore wind is a huge economic opportunity and driver for this region. We've seen Siemens Gamesa bringing their blade finishing facility here. That's an opportunity to be part of the supply chain for the offshore wind industry, which is not only the project in Hampton Roads and the 2 in North Carolina, but the 14 between North Carolina and Maine that are under some phase of development. Our project is the largest and the first in federal waters, and making sure that project moves forward smoothly is incredibly important. I've been a leader on that in Congress. I started a bipartisan offshore wind caucus. It includes both coasts, the Gulf of Mexico, and bringing people together to work with every federal agency, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, NOAA, the Coast Guard, all of those entities that are going to be critical in making sure that this development gets off the ground smoothly, and that we can produce offshore wind here as well as support the supply chain for that. With regards to the defense industry, I shouldn't be surprised because I've heard these talking points a lot of times, but with my opponent saying I haven't gotten it done, I don't think there's another single member of Congress who's gotten $62 billion added to the defense budget since the end of the Trump administration. This is the largest defense budget that we've ever had. I have been disappointed with the Navy's shipbuilding plans, and I took a round turn on that. The Navy wanted to decommission 24 ships this year, only build 8. We took a round turn on that. We're speeding up the construction of Virginia-class submarines built here, increasing from 10 to 15 DDGs. We're reducing the minimum threshold for the number of amphibs. We're working on bringing a second yard online for production of the frigate. There is no one in Congress who's more in the weeds and more advocating for our shipbuilding industries and understanding that that is the lifeblood of this community here. Other than copy articles that I've written about the threat to China and the improvements we need to the shipbuilding industry, I haven't heard Mrs. Kiggans recommend anything other than just complain with a false fact because we now have the largest defense budget in history.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Kiggans, you have a 30-second rebuttal.
Putting your name on a budget amendment that adds $37 billion to an already weakened military and a defense budget that is insufficient is not enough. Talk about bucking the Biden budget. I can almost set your clock to that 6 months prior to an election. We see our current Congresswoman just campaign as a moderate, but yet as soon as the election's over, she goes back to voting with Nancy Pelosi and not voting like a moderate, right off including voting for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House as her first vote she takes. You look at the number of ships we've made, and we see that China is fast outpacing the number of ships. We are retiring more ships than we're making, and that math doesn't add up.
Thank you, Senator. Congresswoman Luria, 30-second rebuttal.
I agree that we need to keep up with and exceed our naval construction relative to China's increased growth. I think that Mrs. Kiggans doesn't quite understand. In Congress, the majority party decides what legislation comes to the floor. And if you say I voted 99% of the time for the legislation that comes to the floor, 75% of it is bipartisan. So you would have probably voted for it too.
Thank you. The next question goes to Congresswoman Luria. The last time the federal budget was balanced was 2001. In that year, right after 9/11, 60% of Americans, according to Pew Research, trusted the federal government to do the right thing always or most of the time. Today, that polling number is close to 20%. The U.S. debt is $31 trillion plus and projected to hit $45 trillion by 2032. We are currently running a federal deficit of $1.1 trillion. Medicaid and Medicare are $1.457 trillion, state portion notwithstanding. Social Security is $1.1 trillion, and defense spending is $760 billion. Interest on the debt is $447 billion annually. And the largest financial asset of the federal government is student loan debt, which is close to $1.75 trillion. GDP growth has been negative, but mildly so for the last for the first 2 quarters of this year, and inflation is running over 8%. This is the question. With so much of this region dependent on Defense Department spending and what looks to be a fiscal storm on the horizon, what are your priorities to balance the protection of the nation while creating a fiscally healthy economy for your children's future that is currently on an unsustainable fiscal path? 2 minutes, Congresswoman Luria.
Well, I'm glad you asked about this because Mrs. Kiggans has brought up a few times the Inflation Reduction Act. The Inflation Reduction Act is not only fully paid for, but it reduces the deficit by $200 billion over the next 2 years. Let's go back in time a little bit to the Trump administration, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017. That added $1 trillion to the deficit over the next 10 years. It cut taxes for the top 1%. 83% of the benefits went to the top 1%. And the tax benefits that went to working families, which expire starting in 2026, will end shortly. So I think that what I really need to focus on, because you added a lot of things, there was a lot of background information in that question, and looking at Social Security and Medicare. So Mrs. Kiggans has actually been endorsed by Elise Stefanik, Kevin McCarthy, and they have this Compact for America plan. Do you know what that does? That essentially creates the end of Social Security and Medicare. They want to raise the retirement age, and they essentially want to eliminate those benefits over the course of a decade. So since she's such an enthusiastic supporter and she will vote for Kevin McCarthy when she gets to Congress, she said that she's going to jump right aboard that train. I think there's 185 Republican members of the House who've essentially said that they want to end those benefits. And I look around this room, I know that we all pay in to Social Security. We all anticipate that for our retirement, for our parents' and grandparents' retirement, and it's not what the American people want. So why would we send someone to Washington who's going to jump on board a plan that essentially wants to undermine every program that supports the American people and working families and retirees who you care for in your geriatric practice? What did they say when you tell them you want to sign on to a plan that's going to end their Social Security, Mrs. Kiggans?
Senator Kiggans, you have 2 minutes.
So I believe the question was about the deficit clock, and if you log on to look at the deficit clock, and gosh, it just keeps going and going and going, right? So, and this is deficit that my kids inherit, that your kids inherit, our grandkids inherit. We've got to stop the wasteful spending. We've got to restore strength in our economy by stopping the wasteful spending. That means stop voting for the wasteful spending. You know, we've got $1.5 million for Build Back Better, you know, $1.4 million for Inflation Reduction Act. I think we totaled it the other day. It was close to $5 trillion. It was trillions, not billions. So, you know, that wasteful spending has got to be stopped. I want to take a moment to address what's a really important issue to me, and that's Social Security and Medicare, since my opponent brought it up. But let me be clear. We cannot touch the benefits for people receiving or near to receiving Social Security nor Medicare. These are the patients that I care for in healthcare. My geriatric patient population are greatest Americans. These are people that are living on fixed incomes. We have to find ways to save Social Security and to save Medicare, and that's going to require negotiation. But again, you can kind of set your clock to it 6 months prior to an election. The Democrats will like to, including my opponent, use this as a scare tactic, right, for people like our older adults who are living on those fixed incomes of Social Security and Medicare. I have no intention of touching Social Security or Medicare, but I think it's an important issue that we need to clarify. But as far as our economy, you know, again, the deficit clock, that's just a direct result of wasteful spending. And you mentioned things like the student loan forgiveness plan, and just and it's funny, in my opponent talking about the Inflation Reduction Act, you know, it's paid for because we've increased your taxes. That's what's paying for the Inflation Reduction Act. We've got to restore strength in our economy, again, by stopping the wasteful spending.
Thank you, Senator. 30-second rebuttal, Congresswoman Luria.
So when you put out a statement saying you'd vote for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker, I assume that's a lie. You've touted this Compact for America plan, which essentially created by the Republican Study Club or committee, says that the Republicans want to end the entitlement of Social Security and Medicare, but you're standing up here saying it's a benefit and you wouldn't touch it for those geriatric patients who you help. So do you lie to them as your patients too, just like you're lying to the voters in the district and the people in this room?
30-second rebuttal, Senator Kiggans.
Let me be clear once more. We cannot touch the benefits for people that are receiving Social Security or for people near receiving those benefits. These are my patients. They are patients that I have advocated for on the state level. I look forward to advocating for in the halls of Congress as well. And just to touch on the deficit piece again, in the state of Virginia, we have to have a balanced budget. It's great. We don't spend more than we take in. It's been a wonderful thing. We have to compromise in Democratic Senate and a Republican House, but I think it's a great thing about our Commonwealth. I wish we would just put a split second into thinking about doing that on the federal level. Can we balance our budget? I have to balance my budget at home with my family. I think the federal government should be required to do that as well.
Thank you. Senator Kiggans, the next question goes to you. That same ABC Washington Post poll showed that among likely voters, inflation was the #2 issue, 77% saying it was important. The question is, what policy or policies will you work on to address concerns likely voters have about inflation? You have 2 minutes.
I think the biggest thing we can do to address the inflation concern, which, yes, is one, if not two, but I would say #1 of what I'm hearing at the doors and from voters in the 2nd District, is lowering those gas prices, right? Those gas prices are something that affect the price of everything. Those are affecting our grocery prices, our school supply prices, our new shoes prices for my kids. So, right now, it's interesting. I talked to a commander from one of our Navy ships, and he said, we're having to rearrange our watch schedules right now because we have enlisted sailors out there who cannot afford the price of gas. So we're encouraging them to carpool, but it's making us rearrange our watch schedule. So gas prices are literally becoming an issue of national security. I knocked on a door of a gentleman the other day who has a birthday party business. He drives video games around to kids' birthday parties with his pickup truck. And he said, I can hardly afford the gas to drive to kids' birthday parties. Oh, by the way, people don't want to spend the money on kids' birthday parties. He's like, I'm in real danger this year of losing my house. So, these are the people that are hurting out there. And that's a direct result of this 40-year high inflation that we are feeling, not just because of gas and grocery prices, but people have less money in their savings accounts. The stock market is down 20%. And as much as I hear about gas and grocery prices, I'm now starting to hear about people have less in their savings accounts. That's something that affects each and every one of us in this room. But we've got to restore strength in our economy through lowering gas prices, through being domestic energy producers, maintaining things like the Keystone Pipeline. I'd like to be a domestic energy exporter, but there's changes we can make to help get not only our gas prices down, but our economy and our country back on the right track.
Thank you, Senator Kiggans. Congresswoman Luria, 2 minutes.
I noticed that Mrs. Kiggans keeps mentioning gas prices. I have her yet to hear any recommendation of how we could lower gas prices. So maybe I'm missing something. I actually, in Congress, we're actually allowed to yield our time to another member. Would you allow me to yield the last 1 minute and 39 seconds to Mrs. Kiggans to explain how she's going to lower gas prices? But since that's not part of the rules of the debate, I'll continue with things that I mentioned that specifically talk about how we're going to become energy independent and all of the above energy policy that includes things such as improving and increasing the amount of renewable energy, especially nuclear, advanced nuclear. I've been a leader in the House on advanced nuclear power. I've had legislation passed with Senator Murkowski in the Senate, the Nuclear Energy Leadership Act, which invests in advanced reactor demonstration projects. This year, we're working on the fuel supply chain, not only the high-assay LEU fuel for advanced reactors, but there's a little bit of a vulnerability there because the majority of our low-enriched uranium actually also comes from Russia. So Vladimir Putin is deciding gas prices right now. And we cannot allow that to happen. That is why we need energy independence. We need to invest in every type of energy available to lower those prices for consumers. And I keep seeing the view out the window here and knowing that 26 miles off the coast, we can have a huge part of that with developing offshore wind here in Virginia, the largest project in the country, the first in federal waters, getting to the goal of 30 gigawatts by 2030. And my opponent, again and again, has rejected all of the measures that we have taken in the bipartisan infrastructure package to improve the transmission grid, and the Inflation Reduction Act to promote all of these types of advanced and renewable energy, including nuclear, which will ultimately lower the cost of energy.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Kiggans, you have a 30-second rebuttal.
Gas prices are up 20 to 30 cents just this week alone. I just filled up my minivan yesterday. I think it's interesting that we're blaming Putin for our rise in gas prices when we have 8.3% inflation. We are absolutely in a recession, and that's a direct result of Joe Biden, when he took office, 1.4% inflation, those policies that my opponent continues to vote for. You want to talk about energy policy? I know it's been a great honor to work with Governor Youngkin up in Richmond, and he just released his energy plan, which I support, talking a lot about nuclear expansion. I'm super excited for Southwest Virginia and the job opportunities and growth with building a new facility out there. So looking forward to supporting him in the future as well.
Congresswoman Luria, you have a 30-second rebuttal.
I'll pass.
Okay. Next question goes to Congresswoman Luria. Since we all brought up energy, let's go there. 2 years ago, the Atlantic Coast Pipeline was canceled due to legal challenges, delays, and cost uncertainty. That pipeline, which was supported by both labor and business in this region, would have brought much-needed natural gas to this region. Question, do you consider the end of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline a victory or a loss for this region? And what should businesses and federal government installations in this region expect from you to help them meet their energy needs in the future? 2 minutes.
Well, the last part of the question, what should they expect from me? Support for the nuclear industry. You know, I tell the folks at Dominion, you guys don't talk enough about nuclear power. 40% of our power here in Virginia with Surrey and North Anna in the Dominion service area is already nuclear. What can they expect from me? Offshore wind development. I've already mentioned that. You know, we're not going to wake up tomorrow and stop using oil and natural gas. Of course, we need adequate transmission of oil and natural gas to support our industry in the area, but that's not the only barrier to development of industry across Hampton Roads. So I think that I will continue to be supportive of all of the elements of developing business here. If we look at the bipartisan infrastructure package, the amount of resources that are going to roads, bridges, tunnels, transportation, the expansion of the Port of Virginia, those along with the expansion of access to adequate energy across our region. And the bipartisan infrastructure package alone invested billions of dollars, which will go to improving our electric grid. So the Atlantic Coast Pipeline is not the end-all, be-all to growing business in this region. And you know, I serve on the Homeland Security Committee as well. There's a lot of vulnerability in our transmission pipelines. We saw what happened with the Colonial Pipeline last year and how gas prices shot up immediately. It wasn't just gas prices, but it was availability. Sometimes you had to drive around on a particular day and even find a gas station that had gas that day. So there's a lot that needs to be done as well to improve the cyber security and industrial security of our electric, gas, and other energy transmission pipelines and infrastructure.
Thank you. Senator Kiggans, 2 minutes.
Yeah, another reason I run for Congress is to restore strength in our energy production. And again, I echo Governor Youngkin's all-above approach, which definitely does include nuclear energy. It's an exciting thing that we see it in real life in the military with our carriers and our submarines, and I'm excited to see the job and just growth for the localities in Southwest Virginia because of that. But you know, my opponent continues to support energy mandates, and you look at things like Build Back Better, and you look at things like the Inflation Reduction Act, and she actually stood on a stage and said, well, that's just the name of that bill only. It's really a huge environmental bill, thus making all of the country look like places like California. You know, I sat through in the state Senate what was a bill I think most people in this room are aware of, where we actually wanted to marry Virginia to California with our electric vehicle mandates. And I sat there with a pink highlighter that day and highlighted the word California every time it was in that bill. And it was 5 different times that they said, we're just going to do what California does. We're just going to do what California does. Well, we see what's going on in California right now, right, with their power grid. They can't even power things like their air condition between certain hours in the afternoon because of the mandates that have been put in place, and requiring us all to drive electric vehicles by 2035. These are the types of things that we have to stop on the federal level. Those types of energy mandates. I too am interested in clean energy and things like the environment, the beach and the bay. These things are important to me as well. But one thing I hate is big government. I hate government in my life, right? That's never the way to go. That's an expanding government, putting mandates on, again, hardworking, tax-paying Americans who are struggling right now as a result of a 40-year high inflation. These are the reasons why I run for Congress.
Thank you, Senator. 30-second rebuttal, Congresswoman Luria.
Well, it's interesting, at a recent Virginia Beach City Council meeting, there were discussions about expanding electric vehicle charging stations around the city of Virginia Beach. And the city of Virginia Beach was very excited to learn that there is federal funding in the bipartisan infrastructure package that can help with that. So hopefully they will take advantage of that. And if you don't want Virginia to become like California for clean energy, you certainly want Virginia to become like Texas for lack of access to reproductive health care.
30-second rebuttal, Senator Kiggans.
I'm just excited to work with Governor Youngkin. I think he's got some great ideas, again, with this all-the-above energy approach. It's the way to go, right? We've got to start thinking outside the box. I think each and every one of us want to reduce our carbon footprint, but there's ways to do it, and exciting new ways to do it that can bring a lot of jobs and just economic development to our locality here. So I'm excited to support those on the state level and in Congress.
Okay. Next question goes back to Senator Kiggans. Very recently, the impact of Hurricane Ian forced the closure of many schools, government offices, and businesses in this region. Obviously, this is not the first time this region has dealt with sea level rise. Let's combine, if we can, the most recent discussion on energy and RGGI with policies to be adopted at the federal level to combat recurrent flooding. 2 minutes, Senator Kiggans.
Yeah, another part of Governor Youngkin's energy policy is to reevaluate every five years a Clean Energy Act. You know, what are we going to do? Let's look at it in chunks, because I think that overarching mandates is never the way to go. You talk about things like sea level rise and flooding, and these are issues in our community. They're issues that impact our national security. We hear from people that work on base, and I know our enlisted servicemen and women are people that are driving to and from base, are impacted by flooding. So we have an antiquated drainage system. A lot of room for improvement. I know there's been a significant amount of state money that we've dedicated and federal money as well. It's something that I want to continue to work with places like City Council and our localities to try to just improve our infrastructure and our transportation so we can all get to work, right? Because that's important. But the problem I have is with government involvement and government mandates for things like again, for our clean energy policies. That's where I think that we really need to take a step back, and that's why I think there's a big difference between Democrats and Republicans right now. And Democrats are very interested in mandates and letting the government, tell you how to run your life, and things that my opponent supports those mandates. Again, voting with Nancy Pelosi 99% of the time for a lot of these clean energy mandates. But I run to restore strength in our communities, and one way to do that is by improving infrastructure. 2
minutes, Congresswoman Luria.
Well, I thank Mrs. Kiggans for acknowledging the federal investment in infrastructure, and especially in flooding mitigation and reduction. It's no small feat that $350 million will be going to the city of Norfolk to begin the next phase of the Army Corps' flood wall project, which will help many businesses and our region economically. And I'll just quote her. I'm glad that you gave us a pen up here, because I wrote down, she doesn't support overarching mandates. That's never the way to go. She says, letting government tell you how to live your life isn't the way to go. And I noticed when she had a chance in a rebuttal, when I brought up her policy and views about choice, she chose not to address it. But she clearly wants to tell you how to live your life if you're a woman who's dying because of a complicated pregnancy. She certainly wants to tell you that if you're a 10-year-old who's a rape or incest victim and can't get an abortion here in Virginia. So I just think it's ironic that she can say that about energy policy, but if it comes to reproductive health care or her statements about how burdensome and unfair it was to wear masks during a public health emergency, she doesn't want to address that. So I just don't understand how she thinks she can have it both ways.
30-second rebuttal, Senator Kiggans.
I know we came here today to talk about business issues, but my opponent can't because she has nothing that the Democrats will offer for solutions for this. So I want to be clear about me being a pro-life candidate who believes that we should discuss abortion with compassion. I am not appreciative of my opponent who lies about me. I have always been a person who supported abortion in cases of rape, incest, and the life of the mother. I've never made it my goal to ban or make abortion illegal at the federal level, but my opponent does this because she's an extremist on this issue.
Okay, when you ran in the primary, Mrs. Kiggans, your website's first bullet was, I thought I had 30 seconds.
Let's not interrupt. She finished her statement. Go ahead, 30-second rebuttal.
Oh, she did. I interrupted you. I'm sorry. Her number one bullet when she was running in a Republican primary to be Republican enough was that her reason, and she said this in her first debate when she ran for the state Senate, her reason for running was to protect the sanctity of life. Her number one reason. She does not believe in choice. She has said time and again that she wants to restrict a woman's right to choice. And she won't even show up for an interview with a national news outlet. She sends the Attorney General, who speaks on her behalf and says the same thing, that she supports a federal 15-week ban.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Well, I was prepared for this one, so let's go there. Abortion once and for all. Former school teacher, thank you. Where do you stand on abortion? Not where your opponent stands on abortion, but where do you stand? Should there be any restrictions or exceptions? Congresswoman Luria, your website says a woman's right to choose should be made between a woman, her health care provider, and her faith. We need to enshrine reproductive protections into federal law to protect Americans from government overreach and restore the rights of women across the country. I will continue to be an advocate in Congress for women and fight to protect the rights of all Americans, including the right to choose. 2 minutes.
Where do I stand on this? I think that a woman should have a right to that choice. It should be a choice that's made between that woman, her doctor, her family, and her faith. And I believe that we should codify Roe. For longer than my entire adult life, the Roe versus Wade decision has been the law of the land. I voted twice in Congress for legislation that would codify that. And since we're here to talk about business, I don't want to eat up all of our time talking about abortion, but you can clearly see in states that have already had snapback restrictions the impact that that's having on the business community. So it is a business issue. And I don't think that our major employers in this region, I know Mrs. Kiggans was, as soon as the Dobbs decision happened, getting in her car, a minivan, getting in her minivan to drive to Richmond because she thought the governor was going to call a special section to try to end reproductive freedom here in Virginia. And the truth is, if we go that way in Virginia, we're going to have every large business that we would like to come here to diversify our economy, which we spent time talking about at the beginning of this debate, they're going to run the other way as fast as they can. Businesses all over the country, large and small, are providing benefits to their employees now in these states that have restricted abortion access so that they can travel to other states. They are not investing in states that have restrictive policies about women's health care.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Kiggans, your website says Jen will focus on supporting and improving foster care, adoption, and family support services. For women, Jen has supported expanding access to birth control and contraception. Furthermore, Jen will ensure that mothers have access to the highest quality of care and the resources they need to choose life. Jen has been a champion for the unborn and a lifelong defender of our pro-life values as a mother, nurse practitioner, and state senator. 2 minutes.
Thank you. I want to restate that I'm a pro-life candidate, and I think this is an issue that we need to be talking about with compassion. These are women in crisis. These are people that I've cared for as a healthcare provider. My opponent continues to lie about my stance on abortion. To reiterate, I've always allowed for those exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. You can see these words coming from my mouth today. It's been our caucus stance up in Richmond as well. It's never been a push for me to ban or make abortion illegal. The reason why this is happening is my opponent is using this as a distraction because she's actually the abortion extremist, and I want to tell you why, because she's voted not once but twice for the Women's Health Protection Act on the floor of the U.S. House, which allows for abortion for any reason, at any time, even up to 9 months, and at taxpayer expense. This is something that about 80% of Americans, disagree with. And what you'll never hear her say is, what are her restrictions? Because again, 80% of us think that there should be some common sense restriction on abortion. But if I could cede my time, I would say to her, what are your restrictions on abortion? Tell us, what is the weak limit? Because the media doesn't ask. No one has asked. She is not answering where her restrictions lie with abortion. And I'm glad that you quoted my website about being a proponent of things like birth control and how to facilitate adoptions. I think there's a broader discussion to be had, the mental health care of women who are in these crisis situations. I want to enable women to choose life at every turn. I want them to know there are other options out there. I do believe that it should be a state issue that's handled on the state level. It'll be something for the General Assembly to decide next year.
Thank you, Senator Kiggans. Congresswoman Luria, 30-second rebuttal.
I think I've clearly stated my position. I believe in codifying Roe. The Virginia law is very much in line with the Roe versus Wade decision, and I would support something similar to that at the national level. Secondly, contraception. You said access to contraception. Does everybody in this room know that 95% of the Republicans in Congress, just a month and a half ago, voted against affirming a woman's right to contraception? Those are the very people she is endorsed by, and charge was led by Kevin McCarthy, who she wants to go vote for Speaker. So if you have a question about this issue and access to abortion, and I do think reasonable restrictions should be in place, such as outlined under the Roe decision, I don't think anyone in this room would go tell someone that you don't have a right to contraception.
Senator Kiggans, Congresswoman Luria went 15 seconds over her rebuttal. Please take 45 seconds to rebut.
Thank you. So I'm a mom with 4 kids, so I'm a believer in contraception. I'll say that. Kids are expensive. But as far as restrictions, she's still not answering the question for me, and I really wish one of the reporters maybe back in the room after this can actually ask her, what are your restrictions on abortion? Do you have any? Because the House floor vote that you've taken, again, twice for the Women's Health Protection Act, which really doesn't protect women's health, is to allow for abortions at any time, even up to 9 months, which we've seen that push in Virginia. We all remember that with Kathy Tran and Governor Northam. And the Women's Health Protection Act allows for not only abortions at any time, but for any reason and at taxpayer expense with no restrictions. I want somebody to ask her what restrictions she supports.
Thank you. Well, I think we need to continue to be there until we get this one resolved so that we don't bring in the reporters when you two are here asking to represent the 2nd Congressional District. Are there any restrictions? What are your specific restrictions, Senator Kiggans? Exceptions to abortion. 2 minutes.
So it's a state level issue right now. You know, I think the Governor Youngkin has proposed things like a 15-week ban. It's a discussion to be had and to be decided at the state level, but a common sense restriction is something I support. I am staunchly against abortions up to 9 months, allowing for those exceptions, again, for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. But important piece to remember here is me being called an abortionist extremist time and time again with the unhinged television commercials is to distract from my opponent's view, which she is the extremist, which they are not talking about this election cycle.
Congresswoman Luria, 2 minutes.
Okay, I'm confused. You say this is to be decided at the state level, but had you been in Congress several weeks ago when we had a vote on this legislation, would you have said, like, I'm going to pass on this vote? I'm not going to tell you my stance because I want the folks in Richmond and Montgomery and every state capital around the country to vote on this, but not me? When Lindsey Graham introduced legislation with a 15-week ban, it also included exceptions, but they were draconian. A woman had to provide a police report, almost like, say, that someone had to be convicted, which takes years, to show that she'd been raped to get the abortion. I've said 3 times in this debate alone that I support codifying the Roe versus Wade decision, and that the Virginia law that is in place now I find to be a reasonable interpretation and implementation of the Roe versus Wade decision, and I will continue to support that when I continue to serve in Congress.
30 seconds, Senator Kiggans.
Again, my opponent's extreme position, abortions for any reason, for any time at taxpayer expense. I'd like to say, shame on you for even insinuating that I'm a person who wants to jail other nurses and healthcare providers for things like having an abortion. I'm a mom, I'm a female, I'm a healthcare provider. I think this is a discussion that needs to be expanded on, again, with a lot more compassion than is discussed. It's not a boxed issue and something to be decided once and for all at the state level.
30 seconds. Congresswoman Luria?
So if it's to be decided at the state level and you were to be elected to Congress, if I'm understanding it, you're going to say it's not your responsibility to vote on that? Should every state have different rules? This is the business community. Let's talk about business. Is a business going to locate in a state that has draconian rules and no access to abortion, or are they going to go to states where they know that women can get the full range of reproductive health care and contraception? So I just don't understand why you can't give an answer. You're saying it's the state level now because you want to go to the federal level.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Let's continue in healthcare. The United States is the wealthiest country in the world and spends at least 40% more on healthcare per person than any other country. This question begins with Congresswoman Luria. The United States is the unhealthiest country globally because of its high obesity rate, and that of heart disease, diabetes, and other illnesses that go along with it. What public policies should the federal government adopt in order to address our unhealthy behaviors that ultimately drive our health care costs? You have 2 minutes.
I'm glad you brought up the high cost of health care, because I recall 4 years ago when I stood here for the chamber debate. It was actually across the street, Bruce, at the Cavalier when we did it 4 years ago. And we talked about what could we do to get the cost of health care down. And I'm really proud in my second term in Congress that we have passed the legislation that I was talking about there that President Biden has signed into law. Legislation that will cut prescription drug costs for seniors. For Medicare to be able to negotiate prescription drug costs for seniors, to have an out-of-pocket cap on prescription drug costs for seniors, and to keep the cost of insulin to $35 for seniors on Medicare. I'm pretty sure that would be popular with the geriatric patients that Mrs. Kiggans cares for, but she said she would vote against it.
2 minutes. Senator Kiggans.
I run for Congress to restore strength in health care. This is an important issue for me. I'd like to point out that the Inflation Reduction Act, which my opponents supported, didn't address drug transparency, and it certainly didn't affect and it didn't address every drug. We talk about seniors, and I know that, my opponent's touting lowering prescription drug prices. Let me tell you about our greatest generation and senior citizens who are, again, these are my people. These are my people that I advocate for in the state level. These are people that I love, that I have devoted a career to. These people live on fixed income. Do you know what happens right now to the economic policies that are put in place by this administration to people on fixed income? They can't afford their drugs. I don't care how much they cost. They will sacrifice that when they're having to choose between food and gas prices, paying for food and gas. And when they can't afford to refill their prescriptions, they do things like they cut their pills in half, or they only take their medication every other day. They don't take it as I prescribe it, and that leads to poor health outcomes. So the economic impact of what's going on with our 40-year high inflation is hurting these people. This is what we need to be focused on. This is what my opponent is not focused on. Voting with Joe Biden's economic policies, with the wasteful spending and the increased government mandates, voting with them 99% of the time is not helpful to people like our greatest generation who live on these fixed incomes. So, as a healthcare provider who focuses on that area, it's been a great honor to advocate for them on the state level, things like nursing home reform, things like visitation policies through COVID, things like workforce, or people that take care of them in places like nursing facilities and assisted living. It's going to be a great honor to not only advocate, but to be a voice for our greatest generation up in Congress.
Thank you, Senator. 30-second rebuttal.
Okay. It sounds like you understand that there are high drug prices for seniors. I also understand that you would have voted against the legislation that was recently passed and signed into law that would reduce those drug prices for seniors. How exactly will you explain that to your patients? And also, as far as fixed income for seniors, for 4 years in a row, I just got a call from the White House day before yesterday. The president signed into law my pay raise for disabled veterans 4 years straight. It is adjusted to the inflation the same way as Social Security, and our disabled veterans and survivors will see the highest pay raise that they've seen in our country's history this year, thanks to my legislation for the 4th straight year.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luria. Senator Kiggans, you have 40 seconds to rebut.
Our veterans are another group of people that are on a fixed income right now that are struggling with things like affording their medications and gas and groceries. And it's these people on fixed incomes that I am, again, most worried about. We've got to focus on the economy. I know there's a lot of issues on the ballot this year, but by far and away, it's about the economy. So what are we going to do? What are the Democrats' solutions to restoring strength in our economy, to lowering this inflation rate? Again, 1.4% when Joe Biden took office. Now, I'm not applauding going from 9.1 to 8.5 and 8.3. I know we all feel it. I don't care if you're a Democrat or Republican or independent. We're paying more now for our gas and groceries, and that's where we need to be focused.
Thank you. Since we have brought up health care and veterans, let's discuss veterans suicide. Mental health is a crisis in this country, yet no one seems to want to talk about it substantively or deal with the impact directly of veterans and suicide in our communities. 2-minute question to Senator Kiggans. What specifically would you do at the federal level to combat veteran suicide? 2 minutes.
We can do so much better than what we're doing right now for our veterans. I run to restore strength in our mental health care system for our veterans. It is one area that there's so much need for improvement. You know, as a healthcare provider, as a primary care provider, I give a lot of mental health care. If I want to or not. It's something that politicians, when we talk about mental health care, we do it on the state level as well, but unless you really understand the nuances of what providers feel and what our patient challenges are, you know, I feel like that's an important reason why we need to elect more people that understand how to give mental health care. I've been an advocate for our providers on the state level. Gosh, those are people that are so stressed and strained right now with the amount of mental health care that's being required. We've got to do better with availability and accessibility. I hear from our veteran population about challenges with same-day care, challenges for their family members, too, to receive mental health care, ensuring that we have TRICARE coverage, ensuring that they can get that access, not just through our VA health system, but how can we expand it to the civilian health system where they can perhaps be seen quicker. But you know what we need to be able to give them mental health care? We need providers, people who understand the challenges for treatment. I've been able to expand, you know, how many non-physician providers can work under a psychiatrist on the state level. That was a change that was asked for to us that we were able to pass and get signed into law at the state level. But we've got to restore that strength. I feel like, you know, our current congresswoman isn't, and the Democratic Party in general, just as the priorities are not aligned for where they need to be, which right now is focusing on mental health care for our veteran population, for their families, for civilians as well. It's a big problem, and we can do better than what we're doing.
2 minutes, Congresswoman Luria.
Well, I'm sorry that of all the topics that she's made partisan, that Mrs. Kiggans thinks that veterans health care, veteran suicide is partisan, because it's not. I serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I'm the chair of the Disability Subcommittee there. And if there is one issue in Congress that is, in addition to the defense budget, which passed out of the Armed Services Committee 57-1, there is really nothing in Congress that is more bipartisan and that we're trying to tackle comprehensively within the Veterans Affairs Committee and Congress as a whole. So I'm sorry that she chose to make that also partisan and a sign of weakness of this administration. We have expanded access to same-day care. We have expanded the window for those veterans. Characterization of discharge is a very significant issue, and often there are many veterans who may have been separated from the military because of misconduct or poor performance. Well, the misconduct and poor performance was also inherently linked to mental health issues. So we're working through on the Veterans Affairs side and on the Armed Services side, making sure that all of those veterans have that access to care with no questions asked through the VA immediately. I also mentioned the increase in access to veterans care. 2 Congresses in a row, I have been the leader through the subcommittee that I chair in creating the 2 largest increases in access to veteran care in our lifetime. Blue Water Navy veterans, Vietnam-era veterans who were exposed to Agent Orange, never had VA health care for 40 to 50 years. We got that done, and we passed that into law to provide access to those veterans from the Vietnam era. The PACT Act for burn pits, the Covenant Act, the part of that was my legislation, is the largest access to care for veterans in any of our lifetimes. 3.5 million additional veterans will have access to care. And these are combat veterans who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, were exposed to toxic substances during their service, and they need health care for those conditions as well as mental health care, and we have expanded and given them access to that.
Thank you, Congresswoman. 30-second rebuttal, Senator Kiggans.
The number of veterans who die every day from suicide is unacceptable. I've considered a failure, a leadership failure, that we are not just finding a solution to this, but finding a solution to this is a multifaceted problem. Again, I mean, for me, I see it as a lot of, we're not talking even about continuity of care pieces. Sometimes these people are identified or they seek help, we get them stabilized in patient psych, but then we lose them to the community. We lose them because they don't do follow-up appointments, they don't take their medications as prescribed. We need to find a place that we can follow them through the community. I just think that our priorities are not right, they're not focused this time, and that's the evidence of that is in the number of people that are killing themselves still on a daily basis.
Thank you, Senator. 45-second rebuttal, Congresswoman Luria.
So I do believe that there are areas for improvement in the continuity of care, and that's something that we've worked on both in the Health and Disability subcommittees of the Veterans Affairs Committee. We have made measures by which providers have a much easier means to refer patients who they may be seeing for primary care. for chronic conditions, for broken bone, all of the normal care, but closing that link between the primary care provider and referring a veteran based off of significant signals and indicators that are commonly known and observed and studied within the different demographics within the VA, to make sure that those veterans are also offered access to that care when a primary care provider has an indication that they may be at risk of suicide or harm to themselves or others.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I've followed the news of your campaign, and in the recent pilot article preparing for this debate, your campaign spokespersons mentioned several, or yourself mentioned several issues that you would like to bring up here, making sure that you are both satisfied in that regard. I'm checking the boxes as we go down, and I think one that we have not discussed so far, and we'll get to another one, is the situation on our borders. 2-minute question, beginning with Congresswoman Luria. How do you characterize what's going on the southern border of the United States, and what do you propose to do about it? 2 minutes.
So since I've been in Congress, both under the Trump administration and the current administration, I have voted repeatedly for increased border security. That includes both building physical barriers such as the wall, as well as other measures and other technologies and ways to leverage surveillance of the border and stop illegal crossings. I think we have a significant challenge with regards to immigration reform. I think that we absolutely as a country need comprehensive immigration reform. And I'll just bring this back to the business community here in Hampton Roads. We know from every business across this area that people are struggling to find workers. And comprehensive immigration reform is one of those things that can guarantee that more workers can come to the United States and work legally. I also have, been very clear on my position of DACA and Dreamers and bringing those people out of the shadows, making them have an adequate path to citizenship. I've also supported in the last Congress the Farm Workers Modernization Act, which was a bipartisan effort in both the House and the Senate to improve visas and accessibility for farmers to bring farm workers as necessary to meet that demand. And I think that there are a multitude of issues related to COVID that have complicated this, both the backlog of applications for those people who are seeking to come here legally to live and work, and it covers every sector of our economy, from our universities. I get calls from the universities in the region saying we need assistance with helping to get the visa for a professor in the highest areas of technology and research to come here to the region to help improve our local economy and region and bring the highest tech research here, all the way to those who work in the hospitality industry and the farming industry. So comprehensive immigration reform is absolutely necessary. It hasn't really been broached in Congress since 2013. And I think that, continuing in Congress with our current Democratic majority is something that we will continue to push.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Kiggans, you have 2 minutes.
Our underscore strength in our border, and let me tell you about the border. I was able to go visit there about a month ago with 8 other Republican women that are running for Congress this year. Our borders are not secure. Not only that, I'm running against an opponent who has never criticized the Biden administration for the wide open borders. When I visited Hidalgo, Texas, they brought us to the Rio Grande, where the banks were littered with trash, and we looked across the river and we could see a group of immigrants, illegal immigrants, waiting to come and wade across the Rio Grande into our country. We were there with Border Patrol, who said, they're not gonna come while you're standing here. They're gonna wait till you leave, and then they're gonna wade across. And there's nothing we can do. While we were standing there, we saw another group with a ladder that they took out of the bushes. They put it in the wall. Group climbed over. The ladder went back in the bushes. We talked that day to sheriffs from that locality. We talked to property owners who are scared and all carrying guns at all times, scared for their families. We talked to the human trafficking advocates, the nurses who worked in the emergency rooms down there. They told us 9 out of 10 women and girls are either raped, sexually molested, or human trafficked. The cartels are running the show down there. They stick these people in stash houses right across the border and make them wear colored wristbands according to how much money they still have to pay off for the cartels. It is literally a humanitarian crisis at this moment, one which I do not hear a single Democrat criticizing the current administration. We've got to secure our borders. Not only that, not only is it leading to record high rates of human trafficking, every single state is a border state at this point. Look at the fentanyl deaths. Look at the number of fentanyl deaths that are occurring, the needless deaths. These are people I care for in healthcare as well that are so sad, the stories that we're hearing. We've got to stop that. We've got to secure our borders, but it has to start with actually recognizing the problem. Yes, immigration reform is going to be a part of that, but I'm running against an opponent who has voted against keeping things like Title 42 and Remain in Mexico places or Remain in Mexico in place. These are important things that are already in position that help us, that control our border. Yes, finish the wall, but we can do so much better with restoring strength there.
Thank you, Senator. Congresswoman Luria, you have a 30-second rebuttal.
Sure. Well, to set the record straight, I did very clearly stand up against the Biden administration's prompt and unprepared removal of the Title 42 restrictions. So I do support keeping Title 42 in place until we have the resources necessary in order to deal with the increase of people seeking asylum. So seeking asylum or refugee status, that is a legal way to apply to come and live and work in this country. And if we had comprehensive immigration reform, we could actually make the process better for people like my family, your family, who came here generations ago and did live, work, and grow our families and be part of this community. Yet you'd rather build a wall and just keep them out than worry about the resources and how we fix the actual problem.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Senator Kiggans, you have a 45-second rebuttal.
My opponent, I feel like, is complacent and complicit with the Joe Biden administration and not criticizing what is going on down there at the border. We literally were told stories of rape trees where they hang the underwear of women who they rape in these trees at the border, because that's what's happening to women in our country. The Republican women are on a mission to change that, to secure our borders, to do better for our women. We can do that, and we can get that, and I really look forward to doing that in Congress.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, you devote an entire section of your website to holding China accountable, while Mrs. Congresswoman Luria, your campaign spokesperson, told the pilot you would focus on your record of, quote, securing billions in defense investments to stand up to China, unquote. Any political nerd worth their salt would surmise that both of your polling shows that the 2nd District is concerned about China. But China is also the largest trading customer of the Port of Virginia, with billions going in and out of the port every year. Is there a balance that can be struck? What do you suggest we do, and what lessons can be learned from Russia and Ukraine? 2 minutes, Senator Kiggans.
So China is our greatest national security threat, and it's a threat to our country. Not only do they steal our intellectual property, but they're stealing our manufacturing. We look at what we're still doing and making in China. It scares me to death that 80% of our pharmaceuticals are made there. We've got to do better than that. We've got to bring manufacturing back to this country and really focus on domestic manufacturing. In addition to that, the human rights atrocities that are going on with China, but they are a threat to what we're doing. And we've got to take that threat seriously. We know that they're waiting and watching with Taiwan. If we don't continue to be the deterrent that I know our great country can be, then we're going to see China be more aggressive. We've seen it in Russia and places like Russia and the Ukraine. We've got enemies out there, but we look at what happened, the priorities of the Biden administration, and we look at what happened a year ago. We remember the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, and we killed 13 servicemen and women that day needlessly. The blood of those servicemen and women is on Joe Biden's hands, but not only did we do that, we weren't a deterrent that day, and it was political theater that we got that done on September 11th. Our country was put in a place of weakness. We can do better at restoring strength in our military and in our country so that we are deterrent to China. This is so important, again, to me, not only as a Navy pilot, as a veteran, married to a veteran, a daughter of a veteran, a granddaughter of a veteran, but as a mom to people who are serving. We've got to restore strength. An important way to do that, in addition to bringing manufacturing back to our country, is just restoring strength in our military so that we can be the deterrent to China that I know we are.
2 minutes, Congresswoman Luria.
So China is an existential threat. If there's anything that keeps me up at night, it's China. Everything that I am doing and have done over the course of the last 4 years in Congress, serving on the Armed Services Committee, getting more resources for our Navy, really driving them to stop making some of the dumb decisions they've been making about which ships to divest of, the divest to invest strategy. There's no one who has been more vocal about that. And if you want to hear more at length, next week I'll be speaking with Senator Wicker and former Secretary of the Navy Lehman at the Reagan Institute. It'll be 2 hours on that topic alone, so hopefully you can tune in for that. But you say bring manufacturing back. Exactly. Again, another piece of legislation that my opponent said she wouldn't vote for, the CHIPS Act.
So when you wake up in the morning till you go to sleep at night, everything you use has semiconductor chips in it. Well, where are 90% of those advanced semiconductor chips made? They're made in Taiwan. We have to remove our dependence on Taiwan for semiconductor chips because of the vulnerability, the increased aggression of China against Taiwan. We've seen their increased activity in the region, and we need to be a deterrent. It's not just saying, let's be a deterrent. It's actually not just spending more money in the defense budget, because I honestly think the Department of Defense needs to do a lot of things differently, and I think our foreign policy needs to change. We are well past the point of our policy of strategic ambiguity. The United States of any administration since the 1970s won't say, will we come to the defense of Taiwan or not? I'm one of the few people in the House who has clearly come out and said we need to end this policy of strategic ambiguity. We need to say that the United States will come to the defense of Taiwan in order to maintain the status quo. And that will drive everything we are doing in the defense budget and those investments that we make and our policy. We will actually deploy in a way as to be a deterrent and have the ability and give the president the authorities to do that, because we will have said clearly and unambiguously that we will come to the defense of Taiwan.
Thank you, Congresswoman. 30-second rebuttal, Senator Kiggans.
I'd like to talk about the CHIPS Act, which my opponent just said she supports. What she's not telling you is that it gives money back to China for some of the Green New Deal mandates that are also in that bill. There's also loopholes that allow semiconductor technology to still be driven from China. She's also not telling you how much money she profited from her vote on things like the CHIPS bill, up to $15 million, owning stock in semiconductor chips. The amount of millions of dollars that you've made with some of these insider stock trading votes needs to be acknowledged and needs to be remembered at the ballot box. And these are things that I know you and Congresswoman Spanberger don't even agree with, but about allowing insider stock trading, to which you have certainly benefited from.
Congresswoman, 45-second rebuttal.
I clearly oppose insider stock trading. There are rules in Congress that require complete transparency of all financial interests that one has. And I hardly think that I'm going to stand up here in front of the business community and apologize for being successful. I served in the military for 20 years. I invested wisely. The stock market, it has its ups and downs. When I filed my last report, it was up. And to fact check you again, you might be talking about NVIDIA, for example, which is actually not a chip manufacturer, and they lobbied against the CHIPS bill. So I'm a little bit confused how you think that my investment in that stock, which I actually bought when I was still on active duty in the Navy, so had nothing to do with serving in Congress, has anything to do with my vote. It's insulting that you would think that I would even have the ability to profit from serving in the House. I mean, the information that's available about this legislation, it's presented in public hearings. It's in the newspaper.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I let that one go on because you were in a bit of a passionate thought. I want to make sure you got that out. Thank you. Two more questions. Let's return, if we can, to the question of fiscal health of the country. I believe Congresswoman Luria had requested another rebuttal on this topic, but let's rope in, if we can, student loan forgiveness, because that's going to add to the deficit. Do you support the President's action on student loan debt? And please put it in context of our fiscal health and paying for all the defense and other programs you have mentioned so far today. Congresswoman Luria, 2 minutes.
So I would not have gone about this the way that the president did. I'll tell you a story. I was over at Virginia Wesleyan when I was running the first time in 2018, talking to a group of students, and one student said to me, when you fill out the FAFSA form and you apply for student loan assistance, it doesn't take into account the fact that my parents are still paying off their student loans. And it really struck me how intergenerational this is. So it is an issue with regards to student loan debt. And for that very reason, I introduced legislation. It's bipartisan and bicameral because I'm working with Senator Marco Rubio to eliminate interest on student loan debt. So I have a stepdaughter. We're paying off some of her student loans still. And when you look at that statement and see how much of it is interest, it's staggering. So I think that we need to come up with a solution that's going to be comprehensive. I think that this, way that the president has proposed through this executive order, and it's being challenged in the courts, to say that, a certain group of people in a certain time range are going to get a certain amount of relief, that's not a comprehensive solution. We need a longer-term solution to that. And when you look at, as well, some of the programs that are already in place, like public sector student loan forgiveness, for critical professions like mental health care professionals, teachers, others, who are really doing a service to our community and serving in a public capacity, being able to properly implement those programs, because having heard from constituents who've tried to take advantage of that benefit, it's very challenging, but also to expand the ability for people who work in those critical jobs, who work in law enforcement, who work in healthcare, who work in mental health, who are teachers. I think there's a lot of ways to go about this other than this current proposal, which again I said is being challenged in the courts, and I'm continuing to push the legislation that Senator Marco Rubio and I introduced together to eliminate student loan interest.
Senator Kiggans, 2 minutes.
Are going to restore strength in our economy, and this does not include the current student loan forgiveness that the Joe Biden administration has been proposing, which is going to cost, again, the hard-working, hurting taxpayers of America approximately $6,000 each. It's offensive to people like veterans and our skilled trade workers and VOTEC workers, people who had to find ways to pay for college because they perhaps couldn't afford. I couldn't afford to go to college, so chose to go to college by applying for a Navy ROTC scholarship. It's a slap in the face to our other veterans who might have joined the military for that education benefit. How about people who couldn't afford to pay for college and so they pursued a skilled trade or pursued a VOTEC job? Why should they be forced right now to pay for other people's college loan forgiveness? I just think it's again, hurting people who are already suffering the effects of 40-year high record-breaking inflation and disastrous policies that have been supported by Nancy Pelosi and my opponent, who votes with her 99% of the time. We can do so much better with prioritizing how we're going to get our economy back on track, how we're going to get more money in the pocketbooks of tax-paying Americans than things like focusing on this student debt forgiveness program.
30-second rebuttal. Congresswoman Luria?
I don't have anything to add on this topic. Fine.
Senator Kiggans, 30 seconds.
I don't think I have anything to add either.
Okay. Final question before closing remarks. Another very important aspect of American life that it would be safe to say is unhealthy is the American political climate. Because that climate is so unhealthy, it has infected the business climate and America's position in the world. Both parties are to blame, my estimation, for the deep and destructive divisions that permeate our politics. Both parties have leaders that dangerously denounce certified election results as stolen, rigged, and invalid. Since 2000, almost a quarter century, the only presidential results that were not called into question by the losing party were in 2008 and 2012. Question to Senator Kiggans. The question I have for you is this. What will you do to keep those in your party from continuing down this ruinous road for the Republic? This is about you, as well as Congresswoman Luria, and your roles within your own political party. 2 minutes.
I literally got off my couch in 2019 to run for office because of this reason, because I hated the negativity, I hated the rhetoric, I hated the division that I saw on television. I thought our country deserved better leadership than that. We could do so much better than that. So that motivated me to be a part and to have a seat in the government. They told me when I won that hard-earned election in 2019, the most important job I would have up in Richmond is to go up there and make friends. And so you know what I did? I asked people, what was for lunch on both sides of the aisle? Where'd you get your shoes? What's the weather forecast for tomorrow? I did those things because if we can find places we can agree on the little things, it makes agreeing on the big things so much easier. You know, what I don't approve of is the current state of politics and the division that is put in place right now. I look at places like our president, and when he gives speeches with dark backgrounds and Marines at attention and calling half of the country, a threat to democracy, that's not the right way to proceed. To consider, we're not enemies. We definitely have more in common than we do different. It's important to remember why we run, what the goals are here. Our goal is to restore strength in America. We know our country is the greatest country on earth. It's why I ran in the state senate in 2019. It's been an honor to have a seat at that table. I believe we lead by example. It's why I run for Congress this year, because we can do so much better. Virginia deserves so much better, our Commonwealth, and so does our country.
2 minutes, Congresswoman Luria.
So first, I reject the both sidesism in your question. There are legal means by which to object or question election results, and those are through the courts and through procedures. I will point out that your question implies somehow that the events that we saw on January 6th are normal. They are not a part of our normal political discourse. I will tell you that protecting our democracy is one of my key concerns. When you look at the fact that one party, the leadership of the party that my opponent wants to support and vote for Speaker, doesn't have the courage to stand up and actually say it's wrong, that we had a violent insurrection at the Capitol. And it wasn't just the events of the day of January 6th. Look at everything that was compiled and led up to that. Every lever of government attempted to be corrupted, to say that there was some big lie and the election was stolen. Donald Trump knew that was a lie when he said it. He convinced millions of Americans of it. We still have a clear and present danger in this country because of that political rhetoric. I'm serving on the January 6th committee, and I think that this is the most important thing that I have done or that I ever will do professionally in my life, beyond the 20 years that I served in the Navy, beyond commanding a combat unit of 400 sailors, beyond the work I've done in Congress up to this point, because it's about getting to the facts. It's about laying things out and making sure something like January 6th doesn't happen again. Yet Mrs. Kiggans will just go to Congress and vote for the people in leadership in her party who want to just ignore this and act like it didn't happen and go kiss Donald Trump's ring again because it's political cash that's funding her campaign. She does everything she does for political expediency. I don't know how many times today she's pointed out views that were different than when she was running in a Republican primary, because now she needs to talk to everybody. So I don't know what she stands for, and hopefully, if she gets elected, she'll make up her mind about something, because today she skipped half a dozen votes, won't commit to her positions on things, and she's not fit to serve in the United States Congress.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luria. 40-second rebuttal, Senator Kiggans.
First of all, shame on you for attacking my character as a fellow female naval officer. Secondly, I'd like to address election integrity, which you initially brought up as an important part of this question. It's an issue that I care a lot about because it's a cornerstone of our democracy. It's a place that I want people to feel like when they cast their vote, they have cast it confidently, that their vote counts. I think we saw in 2016, the Democrats weren't happy with the results. In 2020, the Republicans weren't happy with the results. And yes, January 6th was a dark day, and people who broke the law that day need to be held accountable. But I really go back to what the root of the problem is in election integrity, and it's been an issue on the state level. I know that when we had that one-party rule in Richmond, I look at some of the election reform laws that were passed, and I certainly, it's been a priority of mine, and I certainly will continue to make it a priority in Congress.
Congresswoman Senator Kiggans. Congresswoman Luria, 50-second rebuttal.
So sometimes people ask me, tell me about your opponent. And I say, well, there's a few things. She's against a woman's right to choose. Number two, she's an election denier. She has never clearly said in public that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. Never. She says things like, well, he lives in the White House and I wish he didn't. So I don't think she'll get another rebuttal to this. Maybe she'll include it in her closing, that she could clearly and unambiguously say that 2020 was actually a free and fair election and Joe Biden is the president of the United States, because she hasn't had the courage to say that, but she thinks I'm attacking her character.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luria. Before we go to 2-minute closing remarks, which will begin with Congresswoman Luria, I want to address the question that it was asked. In no way, shape, or form was I meant to suggest that January 6th, the events on January 6th, had any relation to any previous elections. That's why I said in the question, dangerously and worse. I didn't mention it in particular for that reason. Congresswoman Luria, you have 2 minutes, closing remarks.
Well, thank you, and thanks again for everybody who took time to participate, join us here in the room, and join us virtually as well. As we've gone through different issues today, there's a few things I've thought of. And a lot of times people stand up here and say, this is why you should vote for me. And I think my track record shows clearly the results that I've given to the 2nd District, not only at the national level with legislation we've talked about, but things such as public safety, commitments, investments on the Eastern Shore, they speak for themselves. And I'll tell you, there's certain cases where I'm not your candidate. I am not your candidate if you think the election was stolen. I'm not your candidate if you think that $70 million of state taxpayer money should go to a forensic audit of the 2020 election in a state that Biden won by 10 points and there's no hint of election fraud. I'm not your candidate if you want to criticize the FBI for doing their job and enforcing federal law. I'm not your candidate if you stand with insurrectionists. I'm not your candidate if you'd rather have Donald J. Trump as president again, because you're so critical of Biden, you obviously supported Donald Trump. And I'm not your candidate if you think that you know what's best for women rather than allowing them to make their own choices. And I'm certainly not your candidate if you don't believe that America continues to have the strongest military in the world. So what I would say is that serving in Congress is a very difficult and rewarding job. And we haven't had a lot of time to talk right through this about the interactions that we have with constituents. But, you know, all of this said and done, it really is, it's all about the people. And it's all about the people who I see about in the community and come up to me and they say, thank you for what you've done. And fill in the blank. Thank you for what you've done for my father who's a disabled veteran. Thank you for what you've done for the environment. Thank you for what you've done to stand up for our democracy. And I would just say to those people who've supported me in 2018 and 2020, thank you for supporting me. I ask for your support again. I will continue the hard work that I've done. I will continue to deliver for Virginia's 2nd District, and I will continue to stand up for our democracy.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luria. Senator Kiggans, final remarks, 2 minutes, 20 seconds.
My entire life has been about service. Service to my country as a Navy pilot, service to my family as a mom of 4 and a Navy wife, and service to my community as a geriatric nurse practitioner and a state senator. You've all been able to hear both of our views, not just on business issues, but also our vision for our community and our country and what motivates us to run. Each election year, my opponent campaigns as a moderate, but in between elections, she doesn't vote like a moderate. She votes like Nancy Pelosi. The first vote she casts is for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker of the House. And then she continues to vote with Pelosi 99% of the time. If you all take away nothing else from today, I want you to take away that statistic. When I knock on doors, talk to moms in carpool lines, neighbors in civic league meetings, or business leaders like many of you, and ask what is driving people to vote this year, the response I usually get is we're not happy with the direction of our country. Then they tell me about the economy and how much they pay to fill their tanks, how much it costs to feed their families, and how much less they have in their savings account. Hardworking Americans are hurting from Joe Biden's disastrous failed economic policies. In the 2nd Congressional District, these policies go by the name of Elaine Luria, who votes for them 99% of the time. The wasteful spending and tax increases must stop. The government mandates and expansion into our lives and businesses must stop. To stop these things and get our country back on track, we must have a change of leadership in Congress. And in the 2nd District, that starts with flipping the seat and firing Nancy Pelosi. My campaign has been focused on the economy, the border, our children's education, crime, and our military, while my opponent has run a one-issue smear campaign based on lies and unhinged television commercials. Voters will remember these things when they cast their vote on November 8th. Thank you for the opportunity to serve my community, my district, and my country in government. It is the honor of a lifetime and a responsibility that I do not take lightly. I ask for your vote, and I look forward to serving as the next Congresswoman from the 2nd Congressional District.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. On behalf of the Hampton Roads Chamber of Commerce, I would like to thank you both personally for your service to the country and the Commonwealth in both your military and political careers. As the brother of a retired Navy captain, helo and fixed wing, as a father-in-law to a recently promoted sergeant in the Marine Corps, civilians like myself never say it enough, but trust me when I say this, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Please have a good day.